here to share, and if you have questions or ideas or thoughts, and let's just share together, but very informal. We haven't prepared anything.
You should prepare though, because you have to ask questions.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Okay.
And if you have, who has the mic? Oh, James has the mic, so if you want to ask a question, just kind of raise your hand. He'll come running over immediately, and you can pull down your mask and hold the mic close to your mouth. Otherwise
Like you're about to eat an ice cream cone,
Yeah.
but haven't taken a bite yet.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, Saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Bless us with your grace. Help magnetize us, that the needle of our consciousness ever keeps pointing toward God alone, toward the realization that we are one. Om. Peace. Amen. Om. 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 Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Well, this is the 5th little group that we've done. And it's fun because each one's different. It's like one person will ask a question and then the whole discussion will go off in that direction. So it's interesting how it's been working. So please feel free to ask anything. It can be about a question about the teachings, about Ananda, the future, about how we deal with different things in our own life. So everything is fair game.
Okay.
Somebody who is used to teaching classes
knows,
somebody has to
knows
ask
the students have to get prompted.
I was wondering, so I've been watching both of you and a number of other friends throughout Ananda, some of the monks in India. There's this incredible quality of lightness of spirit, and it comes through humor, and just there's a playful, elevated quality. And it's something that I noticed that I don't naturally bring often, and I would love to cultivate it more consciously, and just wondered if you have tips, ideas. I mean, obviously I can gather and share jokes and just incorporate that more, but there's just such an upliftment that comes through you and through these others that I've observed, how to cultivate that personally.
Yeah, that's a really, thank you, and thanks for starting the energy. But that's a really interesting question, Shama. You know, there are many, many aspects, many answers, but I'll tell you one of the things that works for me is if I can spend a little time toward the end of a meditation or at the beginning, actually tuning into the feeling of joy, then that I know from doing this for long enough that joy is always present. Just like if you see the light in the forehead with closed eyes, you know that that light is always there. It's just that you don't always take time to be aware of it, but it's always there. The joy is always there. And so by taking a little time to actually feel it and tune into it, you get that feeling more. And then it's almost like that is effervescence. And you just need to let it rise to the surface. You don't need to create humor or create lightness or any of that. You just need to let that which is already within rise to the surface. But first you have to get in touch with the fact that it is there. And there are many different ways to do that, you know. Creativity, joy, being around children, sharing in the natural exuberance of children, lots of different ways. But the essence is that all lightness comes from that innate joy that's within. We had a friend who was a architect and engineer. He designed some of the buildings at Ananda and the clinic and so on, named Zach Stewart. And he was both an architect and an engineer. And he said, engineers study the effect of gravity. You know, we have to know how big the pillars are to hold up the roof and how big the struts are and all of that. He said, that's interesting, but more interesting, at Ananda, what I've observed is that you work with the laws of levity. and so just work with the laws of levity.
And you know, it's different at different stages of our life, and it's different for different individuals. I can think of some great souls who are at Ananda right now who have been there for a long time, and they're pretty serious. And yet I know that they're profoundly spiritually, you know, aware. But so it depends on the individual. And it also depends on the stage of life that we're at. Because in someone, like in your stage of life, in your position, you're very focused, as you should be, on the Dharma of creating a school or whatever it may be. But that's your Dharma now. And, you know, it's sort of like that's where the thrust of your life is. But as time goes on and you frankly fail enough at what you're trying to do, then you just can sort of laugh about it, and then you just don't take anything that seriously. But when you're younger and launching new projects, you know, you want to make it succeed. You feel you have to prove yourself to a certain extent. And, you know, just to be aware that as time goes by, you're able to laugh at things more. You're like, oh yeah, that I remember when that happened, and you know, the house burned down or whatever it was, you know, or you know, we worked so hard to get the school going, and at the last minute it all fell apart, and you know, whatever it may be, and you realize you get a perspective, is what I'm saying, is the things that look like incredible disasters and setbacks. in the end turned out to be actually the best thing that could have happened. And so you just start relaxing with it. And then when that happens, you can get an air of more lightness and joy. But it's always, whenever you hit a setback, just remember, I don't know the last chapter of this story yet. And so let me not get pulled down and get serious and discouraged. Wait till I see how the last chapter plays out. And it's always invariably the things that have happened since I came to Ananda many years ago, the things that seem like the very worst turned out to be the source of the greatest spiritual benefit, invariably. And then you just, at a certain point, you just say, what am I worried about? It all turns out good in the end. But you have to have the experience to trust that that's what's going to happen.
I'll just add that sometimes every individual has certain karmic things that they need to fulfill. And it may be being successful. I'll just speculate. You have a karmic need to be successful in the role that you're in. And so it's important to allow yourself to do that. And not to say, oh, this is somehow not spiritual. Go ahead and succeed, because you won't be able to release that karmic, I'll call it karmic hunger, until you've eaten the meal that fills you up. The danger is to stay at the table too long. So once you've succeeded in that, it doesn't mean that you change occupations, just there comes a time when it'll be right to let go of whatever was motivating you to drive you to do. And as you let go of those things, then the natural levity comes more easily.
There was a story that happened publicly with Swamiji, where it was a big Kriya initiation in the amphitheater, which is, for those who don't know, it's a big outdoor amphitheater and with a stage in the front, and Swami was giving Kriya. And he had these beautiful he was still wearing ochre robes, beautiful silk ochre robes, brand new, that I think Asha had made for him. And people were bringing up the trays of Babaji drink for him to bless, you know where this is going. And one by one, the people tried to be very balanced and poised, bringing these trays. And one woman was bringing it up, and she tripped, and the whole tray of Babaji drink poured, 20 glasses, poured all over Swami. And the poor woman, I thought she was going to just throw herself in the lake and that would be over. But she was just aghast. And Swami, he sat there for a minute and he just said, so it goes, so it goes. And then he just started laughing. And it was the highlight of the Kriya initiation, really. So, okay.
What do you come back as after you've done something like that?
Yes, true. Not a high wire walker for sure.
Yeah, right. Although there was a sweet story, and I don't think she'll be upset. I'll use her name because many know her, and it'll help you tune in. It was Ananda, and she was helping serve at a meal.
It was a fundraising
dinner, and Swami was dressed very elegantly and had something with a white shirt on.
No, he had a beautiful white embroidered kurta on that someone had just given him.
And she brought out tomato soup and spilled it on him. And of course, she was mortified. Swami laughed it off and I think just went and changed his shirt, and that was that. But she was mortified. She spent a year basically thinking about Swami and apologizing in her mind. And at the end of the year, she felt more attunement with him than she ever had because of that. So even I mean, you made light of it, but even the things that seem negative, if we turn that negative happenstance toward something that moves the mind, spotlight of the mind toward God or toward a saint, it will turn out to be a really great blessing.
We could tell you a lot of stories about catastrophes that just turned out to be so funny in the end. And you live through enough of those and you start realizing that it's all Ram Leela, it's all God's play. Okay, other questions? That was a nice question. Thank you for starting. Okay. Do you have a question? You look like you do and you're too shy to ask. Okay, Bhavani.
Okay.
Yep, you can take your mask down and hold it close. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So this is a little more serious question. I'm wondering if we have a close friend who we see is making decisions that are really not so great for them, or straying from the path or leaving the path. What can we do to help?
We were just talking about that exact
At lunch
subject
about it.
with David and Karen.
This is tricky. The tendency is to step in and try to make a corrective. And often, in fact, I would say usually that does not work. And in many cases, it ends up being detrimental to the long-term goal. We were just telling a story, but Devi, there was a young woman who was a good friend of us, but especially of Devi. And she was intending to get into a relationship, and Devi strongly counseled her against it, saying that if you do that, it's very likely that the person that you want to get into the relationship is going to pull you away from Ananda. Oh, no, that's never going to happen. I'm going to bring him to Ananda.
That's not what happened.
Yeah. In fact, she got into the relationship and he pulled her away from Ananda. 2 or 3 years later, she said to Devi...
She came back. The
Yeah, she
relationship
came
ended and
back.
she came back.
Said to Devi, you know, I wanted to come back after 6 months, but I was so mad at you for telling me not to do it that I wouldn't come back. And so intruding in someone's process often comes back to bite us. So what can you do? What is positive? Obviously, if there's any true window of opening in that person, gently, it's like working with a feather touch. Gently suggest something. Even better, try to get a conversation where you have the person suggest what because their soul will know. And if they can see the right thing, if you can draw that out of them in a conversation, then it's a very different thing from suggesting. But Swami counseled us, said, don't try to correct someone before they're ready, because once they say no, then that saying no prevents them. You have to then get them to admit that they were wrong, undo the saying of no before they're able to say yes to what it is. So you have to work very, very gently with it. I don't know the circumstances, but I do know the principle.
But sometimes we just have to, and it's very painful, but we have to let our friends learn from their own mistakes. And, you know, we were just talking about this at lunch, and Karen asked the question, what percentage of the people that you counsel actually are coming for advice, or they just want support? And we said about 10% really want advice. but out of that 10%, maybe 1% follow it. So it's not a good track record, and it's not unique to us. And we've often asked why, and it's because the compulsion of people's karma, of other people's karma, and they can't. There's a little window, and we've seen this when people come to you, and the karma is not yet fixed in stone, where they can make a change, but it's rare and it's a small window. And then that window's closed and they don't have the choice anymore. And so we just, like in this situation with this young woman, I tried to keep in touch with her. She didn't respond very much, but I would email her from time to time, how are you doing and all that. She didn't respond much, but then the relationship ended and we started Zooming, and maybe I'll come back to the village. Oh, that would be nice, and then she did come back. But even in their error, their actions which lack clarity and freedom of choice, just remain their friend. And that's really all you can do. And it's the same with, some of you are parents, have raised children, and we were children, and our parents, how many things did you do that were really against what your parents wanted? When I came to Ananda, my father was just heartbroken. He said, you are throwing your life away. And yet I knew I had to do it. I couldn't live the life he wanted for me. So, it's all we can do is keep the continuity of love and friendship and support. But that's about it. It's a sad thing. You wish you could help people more, but directly it's very challenging.
As leaders, you have to be careful. One of the things that Swami was, I would say, almost the strongest corrective he ever gave to Devi and me, and honestly, it was more to me than to Devi. But I had a tendency, which I hope I've dropped now, but of looking ahead and seeing, kind of feeling where something would go, and if I thought it wasn't going to succeed, I would say, oh, don't do it. And I'll give you a specific. There was a man who wanted to start a business about having, it turned into treasures, but he wanted to start a business of taking Swami's recorded talks and marketing those. Well, I looked at the fellow, and he had never succeeded in anything. He just didn't have the energy and certainly didn't have the business sense to make a go of that. And I went to Swami and I said that to him. And Swami got really strong. He said, you may know that, but he doesn't know that. And if you tell him not to do that, you're going to take away the opportunity for him to try something and to learn from it. So don't interfere with somebody wanting to do something. Let them learn. And both of us were right. That man failed at that. But he had a partner who succeeded. And the business got turned over, and here we are 30 years later, or whatever it is, and the Treasures talks have helped thousands and thousands of people. And if I had prevailed with my sense of, oh, he's going to fail, it would have short-circuited. So we have to have enough of a sense of humility to allow God to run the world the way He wants to. And so it's delicate, and yet, of course, we want to help people. But be careful about intruding your opinion onto people.
And one last other little point, and then the next person start getting ready for your question to ask. Yeah. I've often, and sometimes it works, say, God, if you want me to say this to this person, open a door give me the opportunity. And sometimes it happens. Like the person will say, what do you really think about this? And then you can give your opinion or your thoughts, and maybe they'll listen, maybe they won't. But if there's something you really want to say, just pray, God, if it would be helpful, if you want me to be the one to say it, open a door. And sometimes it works.
I love a statement by C.S. Lewis. He said, there are many, many people who want to serve God, most of them in an advisory capacity.
Okay. So,
next picture up?
Tandava has a question. Yeah, you do.
No, he's shaking his head.
No, he doesn't. You don't know yet that you have it, but you do.
Yeah, he looks like a
What's my
deer in
question?
the headlights. Good.
What's my
Yeah,
question?
take down your mask. That's sort of rude of me to say you have a question, but you're such a thoughtful guy. You must have something you want to ask.
That's why I'm working on figuring out what the question is.
You're what?
That's why I'm still working on figuring out what the question is.
Okay.
I'll tell you a bad, politically incorrect joke while you were figuring it out. But there was a comedian, Johnny Carson, who you may know, and he had an act that he called something like the Great Zamboni. And so he would wear a turban and he would predict things, answer things. But somebody would bring him an envelope and he would hold it up and then he would give an answer and then he would open the envelope and see what the question was. So he was holding one up, and that's why I say, pardon me, because it's a little politically incorrect these days, but held it up and he said, chicken teriyaki. And he opened the envelope, and what was the name of the last surviving samurai kamikaze pilot in World War II?
Yay.
Good.
I just wanted to know if you got Dr. Peter's permission to come down here this weekend.
We did, as a matter of fact. Yeah, we asked him, we said, we're planning the trip, and Shanti has assured us that it will be as safe as possible. And he said, actually what he said was, with Shanti's guidance, I feel okay with you coming down.
I felt really so grateful to him for all of his updates and his research.
Yeah.
It helped us, even the people that were not in Nevada County there. And I also just wanted to ask how the people at the village are doing, how they weathered the whole last couple of years, and if people are okay, or did people have to leave? I think about them a lot.
Yeah, it's not been easy. It's been a very challenging 2 years, but what have been the challenges? Probably the same thing everyone faces: isolation, not feeling, feeling a little bit disconnected from community, not being able to come to Sunday service live. Now we can, as you are doing as well. And then also there is I think you are being kind of less affected by this from what I've heard, but there was a small but strong contingency that was anti-vax, and we had to, and they were anti-vax, and then very, very adamant about not being discriminated against. So what do you do with that? We're actually starting kind of reverse discrimination. We're going to have one of the side rooms in our temple for people who feel vulnerable, who are vaccinated, that they can just be in that room by themselves and see the Sunday service on the screen, because we couldn't tell the non-vax people they couldn't come. So anyway, that's sort of, it was a solution. But I think my observation, honestly, is the people who had a strong inner life did just fine. The people that were more outward and restless and more dependent on their happiness from outward things they struggled more. And so we just had a satsang with the young people, we call them the next wave at Ananda Village. And we were talking about the tests the community has gone through. The first one was in the first 7 years, was the forest fire that burnt everything down. And that the challenge of that was the destruction of the physical community. And Swami's solution was go out and go on tours and try to raise the energy. Next big test was the lawsuit. That threatened to destroy our ability to represent and serve Master and share his teachings. We prevailed, we were able to continue, but after the fire, about a third of the people left. After the lawsuit, about a third of the people left, because it tested them where they were vulnerable. But what was Swami's solution? A year or two afterwards, he went to India and started the whole marvelous work in India. And so now we have COVID. And what we were saying to the young people is, this is really easy compared to what we've had
It's
before.
a speed bump, it's not a test.
So you could go on from there.
Yeah, just that, nobody has left the community, nor do I know of anybody that's left anywhere in Ananda because of COVID. In fact, many people have flocked to Ananda. So it has not been a test of that level. But what it has tested, and this is really important, is that it's tested our ability to work with harmony and respect for each other. And Devi and I have repeatedly, and even more and more recently, been working to knit the community together so that there is not judgment against people who've made other choices. There isn't discrimination, there's respect, there's harmony, there's inclusion as much as possible. Because we've seen other places, and we see this nationally and politically and
Globally.
and in this country and around the world, where this time and COVID has split people apart, polarized them, and turned them against each other. And there's enormous amount of fighting and conflict and refusal to accept other people's point of view. And that's a disease that this virus has unleashed on the world, one might say. We have to be careful not to allow that disease to inhabit the consciousness of Ananda. We have to rise above that. So Devi and I have been working on that, but it's not a serious thing. The people at Ananda basically want to be harmonious, want to work together. We just have to maneuver through it. But maybe 10% of the people at Ananda Village have had a fairly difficult time with this, and 90% have sailed through. So 10% have been having a difficult time. Another 10% would be happy if it never ended. And the rest of us are coping just fine.
But that was kind of you to ask. Thank
Yeah.
you. And one of the things we talked about with the group earlier, Sai Ganesh asked the question about future directions for what we saw, and something that's coming out of COVID that we can see already is a great benefit is the transferring to so much online teaching and hybrid classes, both in person and online. We're reaching, it's hard to estimate accurately, but I would say 3 or 4 times as many people as we ever have before. And so, again, it's very heartening in that way. And the younger generation is coming up to really take responsibility for many areas, which is just beautiful. The Expanding Light was shut down for 1.5 years, and we have a new team, all people I think in their 30s, late 20s, early 30s, team of 4. And just the way they're revisioning it is marvelous. And it took, the death of one form and now the rebirth of another form through COVID to make that happen.
And I must say, it's been so heartening to see how many people here in this community and work, young people are taking not just good roles, but real baseline responsibility, because obviously you've got to be in a role where you're responsible for something and then grow into that before the, as Swami put it, before the person who is teaching you how to ride the bicycle is now running along beside you. And so we elders, I would say, are hands off, running along beside, just waiting till, it isn't just confidence, it's getting the experience of balancing and steering through some of the difficulties. And then we're going to sit down on the porch in our rockers and watch you all ride around the neighborhood.
I always
Yeah, right.
I always get a little pause when we speak of ourselves as the elders. An anonymous source just sent us this book. It's from Texas, and it was called, on the picture is a big fat book, but there was this picture of this really grim looking old man, just a monk and with the long gray beard and the most sour looking face. It was there, and it said, Elder Hezekiah.
My elder, Joseph the Hezekiah.
And he was some Greek Orthodox monk and who underwent tremendous austerity and suffering. And I thought, why did they send this book to us? And we're trying to think who we can give it to, because I don't think we're going to read it.
So don't cross us, or you're going to get a book in the mail.
We won't send it to anybody down here, but. Yeah.
I have a question, wondering about things at the village. It's occurred to me in the past. So there's a generation, let's say my age or so, and I'm a little younger than you guys, but my generation, it's vitally important that the young people come up and have things to do and learn how to do all of this. But I would imagine at the village especially, there's sort of a group that are not really ready to, so to speak, retire yet. How does that work? Are they okay with this transition? How do you manage all of that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, good question.
Because they want to serve too.
Yeah. Mostly the transition is happening just well.
Organically.
Yeah, organically. And most of the people are happy to turn over the positions of responsibility and still be present as kind of mentors. In one or two cases, they're not ready to do that, and in that case, we just kind of live with it.
One or two is great.
Yeah, one or two is
But,
great.
like for an example, Nityananda was in charge of the expanding light. It got shut down, and he came to us and said, I'm not sure how old he is, in his probably 60 or something like that. He said, I don't really have the energy to start it up again. I just
With
don't.
a new vision.
With a new vision. And so he said, I'll mentor the new people coming in, and he has, but he said it needs a new vision, and that's going to take younger people. Another example is Durga and Vidura up at the meditation retreat. They're both having health problems, and Durga more than Vidura. And they wanted to retire. We couldn't find anybody. Finally, we found Sahaj and Gopal, who are, again, more your age, maybe even. And Durga and Vidura, I said, Durga, when do you want this transition to happen? And she said, tomorrow. So she was ready. But Vidura, they're working on bringing, we shared this with some others, they're totally bringing solar energy. It's going to, not with generators. The generators are gone. It's at these incredible array of solar panels. Vidura wants to finish that project. And he said, I'm done with that. I don't need to come up anymore. So it's kind of happening organically.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, the transition is taking place in such a way that allows those who have been in charge to complete the cycle and finish the projects or bring them to the point where they feel good about turning them over and then releasing them. So it's basically been really quite smooth.
Okay.
In your talk last night about energy, which we all really loved.
Do you remember?
I remembered, it was so great. I wondered just for you personally, if you would share some of your favorite personal techniques when your energy is just like, oh, I just can't get going. What do you personally that really helps you really rely on? Anything for more energy, I'm all for, because I'm also working with that myself.
Do you remember the joke Dr. Peter would tell? And this man came to a doctor. I'm sorry if I offend anybody with this, but this man came to a doctor and said, "Doctor, I'm just so stressed out and nervous, and I just don't know what to do." And the doctor slammed his hands on the desk and he said, "Why don't you drink like I do?" So, anyway, that's not what we do.
Yeah.
We do not. No, that was what the doctor said. We do not. We drink only water and herb tea, diluted herb tea. It's really a lifestyle, Karen. We were talking about this again with the group before, that you have to look at your whole life, and create in every day periods where you're able to relax and refresh yourself. It's also helpful. Our life is fairly structured, like we get up relatively the same time, energize, a few yoga postures, meditate, have breakfast, and then we work for some hours, then time to go for a walk if weather allows, lunch, and so there's a flow of intense focus and then taking a break. Intense focus, then taking a break. So it's really pacing yourself. And don't, I was going to say, and then I realized Swami would not say that. I was going to say, don't push yourself past the breaking point, but that's not what Swami did. He was always pushing us to the breaking point. But then he would back off. And so just keep your one foot on the gas pedal and one foot on the clutch, so to speak. Just let it go in idle for a while and then move ahead, and just keep a rhythm going, because I'm going to speak personally. Your temperament is such that you're high strung, and you would, you'd just give it your full blast, and then it frays your nervous system. So you have to factor that in. Some people are more kind of, they don't have that much energy flowing through them. You have a lot flowing through you, and you have to learn how to use it in a way that you're able to keep going.
Great, thank you.
I used to joke that in the minister's room, we needed a little glass case, like in case of fire, break this. So as the ministers were preparing for giving this class or the Sunday service, there would be different options in there. So in case of emergency, you break this, and in one little vial, there's a triple espresso, and in another little vial, there's chamomile tea. And so, depending on the temperament, so you just have to work with your own temperament. But as Devi said, you and many of us here our tendency is to push too much, and we just need to find ways that we can not stop serving, but just to build in some rest.
Yeah. We're racehorses. Master, as he said, he didn't come for the old nags, he came for the racehorses. But we have to be both the horse and the rider. And when the horse is, white foaming, you let him take a rest.
Yeah. Looked like Eric had a question.
Hello?
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, sorry. I was wondering about how you practice talking to God throughout the day. And this is because, Swamiji mentioned it was about Frank Laubach. He said after he read that, he started to talk to God throughout the day. And for myself, I've always tried to do that. But, and I kind of inventory my own consciousness throughout the day, not during meditation, but during the day. And there'll be, just random thoughts thinking to myself. There'll be thinking about God. Then there's talking to God. And then there's just being in joyful silence with God. And whenever I try to go from thinking about God to talking to God, I can't stay there. I just go into a joyful silence, but it doesn't last very long, and then I just whip back. So I want to be able to stay in a talking to God state, and have that push out the thinking my own thoughts time of the day, rather than, if I go into the joyful silence, I can stay there for a few moments, but then I can't keep that going throughout the day, and then it just reverts back into thinking random thoughts. So is there a way to, how do you, it's like when you get in front of Swamiji, some people mentioned they just forgot their questions. And so how can how can you talk to God throughout the day without,
What works for me is short, simple sentences. One of my favorites is, help! And so the idea of having a long, focused, concentrated conversation with God, by and large, doesn't work very well in a busy life that's pulling you off. Sometimes it does. Sometimes, taking a walk, or there are times when you can really kind of tune in and have a longer conversation. But what I have, I think, by the grace of God, been able to cultivate is basically when I'm in a little bit of a dilemma, or the mind turns toward God, or toward Master, or toward Swami. And I said comically or humorously help, but basically that's what I'm asking for. But what should I do here? How should I try to do this? Or I'm feeling upset about this, whatever it is. So just kind of brief, little, short connections during the day work better. And the long connections are for the meditation time.
We had a community satsang a few weeks ago, and we were talking about rebuilding community spirit after the kind of the isolation and shutdown. And we talked about 4 points for people to think about. Sadhana, looking at your sadhana, looking at your seva, looking at your support, how you're supporting others, and the 4th was
Sadhana, seva, support.
satsang.
Satsang, yeah.
And we asked people, we gave everybody a piece of paper, and we said, write down for each of those areas what you would like to do to deepen your spiritual life, for your sadhana, for your service, for your support, and for satsang.
And then it has to be simple and achievable.
Yeah. And then at the bottom of the piece of paper, write, I commit. And I was sort of hesitating if I should say this or not, but I feel like it would be helpful, and I don't think it will kind of dilute the experience for me. One of the things that I enjoy doing is cooking. And I always do it kind of in the spirit of service. But what I've done, what I changed after that little exercise, was I made a little bitty altar in the kitchen with a little votive light in front of Master. And before I cook any meal, I go in there, I wash my hands, I light the light, and I say, Master, guide me in cooking this meal. I dedicate this service to you. And it is transforming my experience. And it was always sort of intentionally service, but now it's my cooking is getting better because I just oh, no, 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 not so much of that. Oh, a little longer, cook that, and add that to the plate, it makes it prettier. And so find the reason I share that, because it's personal, and you're not supposed to share things that you're doing like that, but I kind of asked Master, should I say that? He said, yeah, it's okay, he won't dilute it for you. But find little ways, so it's not just mental repetition, but maybe there's certain actions, projects or actions that you do every day, and consciously do it with God. Make a little ceremony if you need to, wash your hands, whatever it is, and whether, I don't know what you do during the day, but let's say working in the garden around your house, before you do that, ask God to guide you. How shall I work with these plants? What should I do? Let's do this together. And so it's like you're asking God to go, so you're not just thinking, but you're doing your life with Him. And then you feel His presence more and more. And then it begins spilling off into other areas of your life as well. So that's what's worked for me.
For almost all of us, the problem is not working on our intentions. It's on forgetfulness of focusing on those intentions. So anything that'll help remind you to do that is helpful. But as I said, don't make it too complicated, because otherwise you won't do it.
Okay, let's see who's next.
Can I go second time?
You can go a second time, because no one else.
Unless
there's
there's a
Yeah, if there's someone else in there.
Is there, Tanda's still thinking of his question. You're formatting in your mind, I guess.
carefully.
I'm sorry if I'm teasing you. No, you don't need to.
It's not a clear question, but I would like you to comment on this. I understand the concept of God as the doer, and I'm in kind of a funny place with it, because during the day I'm not self-conscious. I don't feel, God as the doer seems to me to be an antidote to feeling like you're the doer, but I don't feel like I'm the doer either. When I'm going through my day and I'm working on some project, I'm at the store or whatever, I'm not really self-conscious. It's just kind of like what's happening, and I guess it's me, because my body's the one that's moving. So I have trouble feeling God as the doer, but I also don't feel like I'm the doer. So I don't know if you can comment on that a little. Does that make any sense? Or?
Yeah.
That's where most people are.
Yeah. Sometimes it is that affirming that is an antidote to something that is off. Some people are needy for recognition for what they've done. So for them, the affirmation, God is the doer, is good. It's a corrective for that. For others, it isn't so much out of a need, but it is an attempt to see that God is doing everything. And I'll give you a little example that happened actually it was with our son. And our son is not a devotee, but he's not a disciple, and doesn't have a devotional practice, but he's very, very deep, was born and raised at Ananda, and has a great deal of understanding of spiritual principles. So we were having a conversation, and he was saying, I'm working, he said, I'm always working on something new in myself. He said, a little while ago, I realized that I'm very helpful. Kind. So if somebody asks me to help them, I always help them, almost always help them. He said, but I realized that that's not enough. I realized that I rarely initiate helping a person, looking for somebody who needs help. And I don't do that and then initiate it. I wait for them to ask. So coming back to God as the doer, we, at at a certain level, it's a corrective for something that's off. At a higher level, it is initiating in us the understanding and the true experience of the fact that it actually is God that's the doer. So it's not enough to be invisible to ourselves. That's a mid-level. The higher level is to be actively aware that God is doing this thing. So I don't know if that...
No, that's actually very interesting and very helpful.
You know, there was, Swami tells a story that he, in the early days of Ananda, when it was getting started, you know, he put out tremendous, tireless energy to earn the money, to buy the property, and to get the community going. And, you know, it was superhuman effort. And then he said and the little monastery at Ayodhya had started, and people were living in little teepees and little trailers and food trucks and so forth. And he said one evening he was going for a walk, and he saw the little lights out of Ayodhya, and he got this feeling of satisfaction, you know, and he said, "Oh, look what I've done." And then he thought, "Are you happy feeling that way?" And he said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "I realized that if I held on to the thought that I did this, it would diminish my freedom, my attunement with God, my awareness of God's presence." And from that moment on, I just said, I have not done it all. So it's not like you're aware that God's making the decision about what crystals to buy or what books to stock, but it's more total detachment from any results. I didn't do this. Who put the thought in my mind to buy big crystals, you know? It just, I didn't do that. And I mean, this happens with us a lot. There'll be a problem, we'll come up with a solution that really seems like it would be good, and then you realize, I don't know where that idea came from. It wasn't me. So, and then I think you've heard us tell this story that once we were visiting Swamiji in India, and we were having breakfast with him in his home, and he had, shortly before that, had told the community members, "You all should strive to be jivan muktas, freed while living, freed of karma while living in this lifetime. You should strive that." So we were having breakfast with Swami, and he was quietly eating, and one of us mentioned, "You know, Swamiji, that's a pretty tall order." And he had a fork full of food, and he just stopped in midair, and he said, "Finding God is easy. It depends on two things: longer and deeper meditation, and seeing that God is the doer in all things." End of subject. That's it.
He paused first and he said, the whole of the spiritual path is dissolving the ego. And that's done by longer, deeper. So in some cases, it's an antidote, and that can be either to pride or to self-deprecation. You know, so either positive or negative. If you're self-referencing, then the antidote to that is to affirm, at least, God is the doer. But as we're saying at a higher level, it's to bring into active awareness the fact, not just we remember once in a while, but into active awareness that God is in every person, God is in everything, God is in every act. It's only God doing this. And so here again, it's more forgetfulness than intention. We all intend to have the attitude that God is the doer, but we forget to realize that. And we don't need either pride or self-deprecation in order to initiate that. So.
You know, we should probably end because the next group is coming, but I want to say coming full circle, one thing more in response to Shama, and it applies to so many of you who are part of Palo Alto Sangha who are leading different aspects, and just because you're all so sincere and you all work so hard and give so much of yourself, just remember, God doesn't care if you succeed or fail. I could tell you a lot of stories, but we don't have time. But the moments that I have felt Swami's love most deeply was when I failed at something. And so don't worry about that. God watches the heart, and He knows we try, but more He watches our heart for love. So you don't have to prove. To put a fine point on it, if the high school succeeds, if it doesn't succeed, there's not much you can do about it. You're trying the very best you can, and God's love for you is just profoundly there, whatever happens. So just...
Yeah, He doesn't have a performance standard.
No, He doesn't.
He has an intention standard. When Swami was temporarily, he'd been in residence in India for quite some time, and then he was leaving for some months, and Dhyana, Nayaswami Dhyana, said, basically, how can we carry on without your presence here? And Swami just said, remember, this work isn't your work. This work isn't my work. It's the work of Babaji and Master, and they'll take care of it.
And the high school isn't your work.
Yeah.
It isn't Helen's work. It's Master's work.
Yeah.
And if
And
he
it's-
wants it to go, it'll go.
Yeah, and it's your deep blessing to try to be the best implement that you can be. And this is speaking to all of us, not just you. But don't get hung up on thinking that you're less if you don't succeed or greater if you do succeed.
Yeah.
You just try the best you can, and it's really the teaching in the Gita of Nishkan Karma.
And seeing God as the doer in all things.
Yeah, our duty is to do our best. The fruits, whether they're sour or sweet, are God's work.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.